Welcome back to Historical USA. Here we discover the people, places, and events that made America. I'm your host, historian Lisa Weekland, and we are taking a break from New England and the boys in Boston and headed south down into the Carolinas. This week we are delving into the Regulator Movement and the pivotal Battle of Alamance, fought May 16th, 1771. Now, what was the Regulator Movement? Now, it is a movement that started in North Carolina in 1766, and it plays out through 1771. And what it was really was a grassroots uprising against the corrupt officials and unfair taxes in North Carolina. Now, this movement highlights themes of corruption, class struggle, and the quest for justice, which is pretty common themes that continue to resonate through American history. Today we explore the rise of the Regulators, the climactic Battle of Alamance, and the lasting impact of their struggle. Now, in the 1760s in North Carolina, it was a time of significant socioeconomic change. There was a population boom fueled by an influx of Scotch-Irish immigrants. And I'm sure you can comment down below if you are a descendant of any of those immigrants. But what this population boom did is it led to increased tension between the backcountry farmers and the wealthy planter elite in the Carolinas. Now, the farmers, who were primarily self-sufficient and relied on subsistent agriculture, felt more and more marginalized and exploited by corrupt officials who imposed heavy taxes and fees, much like the Sons of Liberty in Boston and New York. One of their leaders was a man named George Sims, and in 1765 he gives an address that is now known as the Nutbush Address. The address's formal name is actually an address to the people of Granville County. And in it, Sims writes, quote, "Where there is no law, there is no transgression in not complying with the arbitrary demands of the lawless officer." Sims urged farmers to demand lawful practices and not pay the fees imposed on them by a tyrannical government. He ends his speech with this, quote, "Here I am this day with my life in my hand, to see my fellow subjects animated with a spirit of liberty and freedom, and to see them lay a foundation for the recovery thereof, and the clearing our county from arbitrary tyranny," end quote. And it becomes a rallying cry for those who felt oppressed. Sims articulated the grievances of the farmers, condemning the excessive taxes and the corrupt practices of their local officials. This address ignited the spark that would eventually lead to the formation of the Regulator Movement. Now, the Regulators were a diverse group of backcountry farmers and settlers who banded together to demand a fairer political process and a reduction in their taxes. Their aims were simple yet profound. Just give us justice, transparency, and for the love of God, please end the political corruption. Now, key figures of this movement included Herman Husband and James Hunter. Husband, known for his eloquence and impassioned speeches, advocated for peaceful protests and negotiations. Hunter, on the other hand, was more of a militant, willing to take up arms to achieve their goals. This divergence in leadership style sometimes caused a considerable amount of friction within the movement, but it also showcased the depth of their commitment to the cause. Now, as tensions escalated, the Regulators organized protests and riots the most notable being the riots of Hillsborough in 1770. They attacked the Supreme Court, demanding the removal of corrupt officials and an end to their exploitative practices. Now, these actions, obviously, they increased the animosity between the regulators and the colonial government, setting the stage for a much larger and more deadly confrontation. By May of 1771, the situation had reached its breaking point. Governor William Tryon, determined to suppress the rebellion, mobilized a militia of about 1,000 men and marched westward to confront the regulators. Tryon's forces were well armed and disciplined, while the regulators, though large in number, lacked formal military training and organization. Now, on the morning of May 16, 1771, the two sides would converge near Alamance Creek. Despite attempts at negotiation, the peace talks failed, and Governor Tryon delivered an ultimatum: disband or face the consequences. The regulators, though, refused to yield, and they prepared themselves for battle. The battle began around 8 a.m. with an exchange of musket fire. The regulators, lacking artillery and military discipline, struggled to maintain their position against Tryon's well-coordinated attacks. After 2 hours of intense fighting, the regulators were overwhelmed and forced to retreat. The battle resulted in significant casualties on both sides, with many regulators killed, wounded, or even captured. The Battle of Alamance marked a decisive victory for the royal governor, William Tryon, but it also exposed a deep-seated resentment and discontent among the colonists. The battle was a precursor to the larger revolutionary struggle that would soon engulf the American colonies. Now, immediately after the battle, Governor Tryon's forces moved through regulator territory, forcing many to sign a loyalty oath, and confiscated much of the regulators' property. Several regulator leaders were captured and executed, serving as a grim warning to others who might consider rebellion. However, the oppressive tactics used by Tryon and his militia also led to a pretty huge shift in public perception. The regulators, once viewed as troublemakers, actually began to be seen as martyrs for justice and fairness. Their plight highlighted the need for more equitable and accountable government. After the battle, many of the regulators actually went into hiding until 1772, when they were no longer considered to be outlaws. Many regulators would move further west into places such as Tennessee, notably establishing both the Watauga Association in 1772 and the state of Franklin in 1784, but those are two separate videos for another time. Now, after 1775, many of the ex-regulators would remain in North Carolina, became loyalists, and actually opposed the American Revolution. There was also a regulator movement in South Carolina. However, it was a little bit different. It had some different goals. See, in South Carolina, it was the landowners who had grievances. However, their main problem stemmed really not from corruption, but from widespread crime and weak and ineffective law enforcement, as well as a lack of representation of government, such as courts and churches. And these regulators were highly successful, joining the Sons of Liberty and even the American Revolution. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating story of the regulators and the Battle of Alamance. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. I hope to see you guys next time as we continue to uncover more of America's past. Until then, bye.